Hey guys, Iamblichus Exhortation to Philosophy, chapter 18. Last video for this chapter from me, and then we'll move on to next chapter. This is a really nice thing Iamblichus does here. He says, okay, first I'll say what he says, then I'll give my interpretation. He says, look at how physicians treat a diseased body, a person with a diseased body. They restrict that person from eating different things, because eating those things will make that person worse. This is if the person has an illness. But what about a healthy body, a person with a healthy body? Physicians will tell that person, you can pretty much eat anything you want in moderation. It's fine. But to an ill person, they will say, okay, these foods you should not eat for this time, for example. These ones you should not eat, and so forth, while the person is diseased. So this is a very important thing to understand. And then, as always, we move from the body to the soul. In the same way, Iamblichus says, the soul, diseased soul, must be restricted in terms of indulging in its appetites, or it will cause itself harm, just like the body in this example we've just given in terms of what it eats. By diseased soul, of course, Iamblichus means unjust, impious, ignorant soul. And I think he says it so in the chapter. What are these? Now my interpretation. Okay, before my interpretation, with regards to the healthy soul, a just, pious, virtuous soul, of course there is freedom. The soul can pretty much do anything it wants. Again, in moderation. So my interpretation now. This is extremely powerful, I think, this part of the chapter, because it starts to hint at things. Who are these physicians? We can, now I'm just going to kind of fantasize. So this is not what Iamblichus says. What Iamblichus says, I have just said, pretty much in exactly the same words he used. In terms of my interpretation, physicians, on the physical level, of course, is physicians. But as everything relates to the non-physical level, we could argue that this is energies that organize and plan a human life. And so they look at a human life, and they look what is good for the soul, and they plan a difficult life where the soul will not have any will have very few luxuries and so forth. And if we often look at spiritual seekers, we often see this with them. If we study astrology, or if we just study biographies of spiritual seekers, we often see that they are born into, not always, but often, into an environment where they're very restricted in terms of what they can do. Even if they're born into rich families, it is often mentally deprived rich families that abuse those children, for example, do not give them any money and so forth, even though the family is rich, for example. And so the person is restricted hugely in terms of what money he has available, what things he has available. Or they're born into poor environments. And by doing this restriction, we remember from the previous chapters, the person is forced to find happiness elsewhere, not in physical things. So the physicians could be not just physical physicians, but could be energies that organize a human's life. But also during life, we see this happen often. A person, often we see this. For example, we take a man who is depraved, is evil, and he acquires wealth by evil ways. And we observe how the life of this man develops. So the person is essentially as a diseased soul. Towards the end of their life, not always, but very often, this person will start to experience hell and chaos. His closest friends will turn against him. He will have great losses. He will lose people who are closest to him, his own children would despise him and disown him. We see this over and over again if we analyze such people. And towards the end of the life, the person goes insane. Not always, but very often. What has happened? A restriction is starting to happen in terms of what is happening with this person's wealth and things that he has available to him. He has been acquiring more and more and more and more, and the natural restriction kicks in, and he starts to lose everything. And towards the end of his life, this person could have absolutely nothing, and could die, literally, with everyone hating him, and a poor man, when he had everything in life before. So what happened? Great restriction applied to purify his soul, at least a little bit, towards the end of the life. And we can see how this will purify this person's thinking. They will start to think that as they lose everything, their world will start to change. And they'll start to reevaluate what they have. Unfortunately, it doesn't always happen. If the person is far gone, for example, as I see in some consultations, if the person is far gone, they will just blame everybody else on what is happening to them. They will blame the country, they will blame their friends, they will blame the court system, they'll blame everything and everyone except for themselves. They become a victim in their mind of what essentially they have created, the chaos and havoc they created. So I guess future lives will purify this person of this ignorance, if they cannot see how with their own actions they're creating their life. So Iamblichus, another point I have in my notes I forgot to mention, Iamblichus says, restraint will often look like a punishment, but it is good for the soul. And I don't remember if it wasn't part of this series on this text, or if it was on some other videos I was doing. I think it was this text, very beginning of this text, where it was said that that which is something like along the lines of oh no, it's as part of Proclus' ideas of evil. I think that's where I mentioned it. That evil for a good man is a good. But a typical good, and a good for a good man is a good. But a typical good, the goods that we see around ourselves, for an evil man is not a good, it's an evil. I remember now, this is at the beginning of this text, that physical goods, for a good man, they're good, because he will use them in a good way. But for an evil man, they are greater evil, because he will use them in an evil way. So what do we have to do? To help the evil man, we have to restrict him of physical goods. To prevent himself from doing himself even more harm, and to doing more harm to others. That's it, guys. That's it for this chapter. Thank you for your time, and next chapter we begin. Next chapter will be fun. It will be about the goods in the soul and happiness. Of course, the whole text is about that. Every chapter is about that. But this one will be fun as well. Let's do a mini meditation now, and we're finished with that. And you can do any meditation you want. Okay, one last point, guys. I realized during my mini meditation is this doesn't have to come from somebody else. We can do this to ourselves. We can restrict our own access to physical things and satisfaction of desires. And essentially, that's what's called self-control. And if we remember the whole text, we remember constantly that the path to a philosophical life is not just study of philosophy, but constant development of self-control. And now we can see how and why it is a good thing. Because developing self-control, restricting ourselves from satisfying different desires, obtaining things and so forth, will prevent us from using those things for evil, essentially, if we're impure. So we have to be very vigilant. It may not be necessary sometimes, and with some things, but with other things, it could be absolutely essential that we restrict ourselves in terms of certain behaviors that we do. Okay? Thank you for your time. YouTube will show a video now. You can click on it and keep watching my channel.